Would the members of the Budget Committee please come to Committee Room 1?
Okay, let's call the meeting to order. We have quorum. Welcome to the Budget Committee. It's a lunchtime edition, just to let everybody know. It's over there in the glasses with the white liquid, or the clear liquid, the water. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? You don't have any conflicts on this one, James? No. I can have a confirmation of the minutes of August 31st, 2015. Councillor Berardinetti, all in favor, opposed, carried. Okay, we'll run through the items. We'll start with BU 11.1, 2014-2015 rent supplement programs. You want to hold that? BU 11.2 Facilities Management and Real Estate and Sustainable Energy Plan 2015 Capital Budget 2016 to 24 Capital Budget Adjustments. You want to hold that? Councillor Berardinetti, you want to move that? Okay. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. 11.3 Toronto Police Services 2015 Operating Budget Adjustments and Operating Budget Variance. Report ending May 31st, 2015. Councillor Pasternak will move the staff recommendations. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. 11.4, the update on the budget process. I'll just hold that. I just want to comment on what that is with everybody, so I'll just hold that for the last item. Okay, 11.1, Councillor Pasternak, you held it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and questions to staff. So this involves a lot of money, and it's spread over 3 programs. Someone in social housing is technically eligible for a rent supplement agreement, as I understand that. Is that it's a layering on top of the already reduced rent? Is that correct from what I'm seeing here?
So I would say it's a bit more complicated than that. Through you, Mr. Chair, the social housing program includes basically an operating subsidy to keep the lights on, but it also includes within it a rent subsidy to bring the rents down to 30% of a tenant's income. There's a subset, there's another program called Rent Supplement on top of that. It gets a little complicated because most of the rent supplements are agreements with private sector landlords, so it's just the rent subsidy for tenants through agreements with landlords in the private sector. Some of those rent supplements have also, over the years, been put into nonprofit buildings in units that would otherwise be at full market rent. So there's a bit of a mix, but the core of the social housing program does include a rent subsidy that's not called a rent supplement, it's just called an RGI subsidy.
So we could have a tenant of, I mean, I'm looking at page 3 here, 3 paragraphs down. We could have a tenant in TCHC who is getting already your staff are shaking their head. I haven't finished the question.
They're mutually exclusive.
They're already, I mean, I'll read, do you want me to read it back? But this is your report. I'm led to believe here that residents of TCHC who are already in, who have already received a below market rent apartment unit can also receive a rent supplement. Is that, maybe I misunderstood.
Sorry, Councillor, you either get one or the other. So you either get a rent subsidy through TCHC, it's not a reduced rent, it's actually a rent subsidy, or you get a rent supplement, the unit would otherwise be at market rent. Because TCHC has buildings that have mixed income, and in some cases, they've added rent supplements for tenants that would otherwise be at market. So they're mutually exclusive.
Right. So these residents of TCHC who are calling Housing Connections and asking for a rent supplement on top of that, do you tell them they are not eligible and they will not be receiving it?
No, what we tell them, if they're living in a market unit in TCHC, they would have to put their name on the wait list for an RGI subsidy, just like anybody from the community. They don't get special treatment because they happen to be living in a market unit. And the reason that's there is so that people can't jump the wait list by moving into a TCHC unit and paying market rent, and then very soon after applying for an RGI subsidy.
So one thing about rent supplement agreements in other jurisdictions is portability. And to what degree can someone move with, I know there's housing allowance, but to what degree can someone take their housing allowance or the rent supplement agreement? The rent supplement agreement, I understand, is anchored. The housing allowance can move. Is that?
That's correct.
So the housing allowance follows the family, or follows the persons?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So this budget line item, and I may want to go to a second round or defer it to the next budget meeting so we can have more questions on this, because it's a major, very significant issue, and when we go to speakers, I'll be talking about it. Your budget number for this seems stagnant. The amount you can allocate to this program, and you've got 2014 was 88.8, 2015 was 88.4. Is that demand driven, or basically that's the envelope, and that's as far as you can go, unless council decides to give you more?
It's basically the envelope. Two of the three programs are included what's called a service level standard, which is a fixed number of units that we have to provide according to the province. The other program, which is the Strong Communities Rent Supplement Program, is strictly a dollar amount that the province gives us every year, and we have to reduce the number of units because it's not increased by inflation. So, but generally speaking, yes, the number of units is fixed and the dollar amount is fixed, and it varies simply by income levels and just trying to manage the budget.
Now, is there a problem with recruiting private landlords to the program? When I bump into a landlord, I start telling them about this, and they don't really know about the program. They say, oh, send me some information. We might be able to do a few units. Do you have a robust program through you, Mr. Chair, to make sure that we bring in new landlords and get them to buy in on the program?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we've got a fixed number of landlords that are in now, and because it's not an expanding program, the money doesn't increase. We only bring in new landlords when others drop out, and it doesn't happen very often. And many of the landlords only have, they might have 5 or 6 units in a building. It won't be the whole building. So we really don't want an entire building to be full of rent supplements. Housing Connections manages this on our behalf, and we're actually bringing Housing Connections into the city, so we'll be managing, we'll understand the program much more directly. But generally speaking, because there's not a lot of turnover.
Any other questions, Councillor Pasternak? I know we're a little bit over. We can do a second round. I just wanted to give
I'll leave it to someone.
Okay, do any other councillors have questions? Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regard to the map in the appendices, Appendix B, it's a map that somewhat mirrors what you might find in terms of income distribution throughout the city, but not necessarily so. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that, because I know that there are significant pockets of poverty in Scarborough, and yet there's not that many supplements there. And I look at the 2 downtown wards, and I'm thinking the downtown area is receiving a lot of supplements. And maybe it's my lack of understanding of downtown housing, but it seems disproportionate for some reason. Has this map been overlaid with one that shows income distribution, and what would it tell us?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's more likely an overlay of where the existing social housing is, because many of these units are a top-up to, they're market units in social housing buildings, and it's a legacy of what we inherited from the province prior to the download.
So there are other areas in the city that you would say are other areas certainly of need for rent supplements. There are people that could most certainly benefit from rent supplements in other pockets of the city, but it's not available to them.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the total number of households in core housing need in the city, just based on income, is over 200,000 households. And I assume their distribution is somewhat different from this. If we had more funding for rent supplements and they weren't attached to social housing, you'd likely see them in other parts of the city.
What's the turnover rate of people receiving rent supplements?
I assume it's somewhat similar to the turnover rate of Toronto Community Housing, which is somewhere between 2% and 5%. It's quite low. It's quite low.
How do we monitor? I mean, presumably people that are receiving rent supplements, life circumstances change for them, they improve. How is it monitored?
There's an annual income review that's carried out, and the rent is recalculated based on income. Okay. And if they're no longer eligible, they're basically, the subsidy would be removed.
And so in that case, so the turnover rate you're estimating is at 2 to 5%. And your budget does not, you say in your budget has been basically static. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Carroll has some questions.
Thank you, yes. I'm wondering if I understood the map differently than Councillor Campbell, perhaps. This is a map of rent supplements, 3 types of rent supplements, but it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't give us the indication of where subsidized, different types of subsidies of housing all exist. So if we were to add to this actual RGI units that are just in as part of the TCHC regular RGI program, the dark purple would then more closely resemble the poverty horseshoe, would it not?
Absolutely, it would.
So some of the places where we see kind of a heavy overlay of rent supplement may be because just basic TCHC, RGI housing complexes are in shorter supply there. And so to meet need in that area, we may have used rent supplements.
Yes. So we're taking advantage of, historically in market units, in nonprofit housing. TCHC does have some mixed income buildings that were nonprofit. But what used to be called public housing, 100% RGI, would not be
Right.
here because there would be no rent supplements in those buildings.
Right. And then it's further exacerbated by you're basically, there are a lot of ground level TCHC complexes, but where rent supplements are doable would tend to be where you have privately owned tower block villages. So you may have a lot of ways of dealing with subsidized housing in the area, but you don't have the classic tower block village where you could smatter the rent supplements, a half a dozen, 10 maybe in a building. You don't have a lot of opportunity in some neighborhoods, and the map can't help us with that either. Right, okay. So the biggest question for me then is the current funding level of the program enough such that where we have someone, often, you know, with someone approaching seniors or a person who is never going to change their circumstances due to disability and total reliance on ODSP, for instance, is the current funding level and the fact that we've stagnated it, does this rent supplement program do all it needs to do to help us with people who need housing assistance, but may be waiting 10 to 15 years to get into TCHC? Because that's the biggest use of this. If someone's in a rent supplement, we know that it's because they're at the end of the list. We haven't got one of the key priorities to help them jump the queue. Have we got enough funding in this program to get those people where we need to get them through their lives?
Through you, Mr. Chair, these are full RGI subsidies, so it's you're coming off
But
the
they
wait
have
list.
an expiration date.
No, they do not. The one program of the three does, Strong Communities Rent Supplement. The other two do not have expiration dates. You just it happens to be a full RGI subsidy usually in a private building,
Right.
rather than in TCHC. What we're short on are housing allowances. We've had good success in the last few years with housing allowances that are portable, and they do not take people off the wait list, but they help with people's affordability issues, and they cost less, generally speaking, than RGI subsidies.
And are they funded in such a way that we're not having to shrink the number of allowances to stay inside a flatlined envelope?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, not really. They're basically, we've been using short-term funding that's been given us to the province under the Affordable Housing Program and now the Investment in Affordable Housing Program, and we do the best we can. The city's been putting about half of its funding under those. They generally run for 3 years or 5 years. But what we do is we're allowed to create a stream, a housing allowance for a family or a household for 5 years or up to 10 years. So we create a stream of, so we take that money and we basically, they will cash flow that for 10 years, and that's how we maximize. So we've got about 3,900 of those housing allowances now, just for comparison.
Okay, but so if I can ask one more question, Mr. Chair, but the ultimate, if we want to be able to better use these funds wherever we need to, ultimately, we just need more permanent social housing units in that program, and then there'll be less need for these.
I would say we've had this discussion internally. We need a balance between stock and a flexible housing allowance program. Some people, their affordability needs are better met with a somewhat shallow housing allowance. They may be working poor. Others really need long-term. They're better off in a nonprofit building where there's other supports that could be for you. Need a balance.
Stock, state of good repair issue.
You need a balance of both.
Yeah. So state of good repair would give us the balance. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Any other questions, committee members at all? Councillor
I have to go
Pasternak.
to a second round, but Councillor Davis has asked for questions, and that's fine to vary the procedures with us.
I think we're okay varying the procedures. Just this once? Okay. Yeah.
It will with us.
Yeah. 1 minute of questions?
We'll
or
always have
two?
friends at the side of the room.
Councillor Davis?
I noticed one of the comments in here is about dealing with increased rent in private market buildings. And there are lots of Aggies above guideline increases all over the place. So I'm wondering if there's anything we're doing about that in terms of monitoring it and providing support to people who are fighting above guideline rent increases. I don't know who does that. I don't know if, Philip, that's your bailiwick.
That's not really related to the housing allowances or rent supplements, but we do fund tenant support programs. So that's how we'll provide funding to fight Aggies. And we provide the Metro Tenant Federation Association with funding to support people fighting
I
Aggies.
understand that, but this says it requires close monitoring to manage associated costs, and costs escalate, and that we are obligated to pay the rent increases. So are we at all, maybe even just monitoring, how are you monitoring above guideline increases in buildings where we have rent supplements? Do we have any information on that? Because the more we pay per unit, the fewer units we're getting, so
We do monitor the benchmark rent, and we will look at it. So we have an agreement with the landlord where the market rents are going up extraordinarily. We will look at that to see why that's happening. It may be an Aggie, it may be something else.
what does that mean? You have an agreement to look at it with a landlord?
Each of these rent supplement agreements is part of an agreement with the landlord.
What's in it?
The agreement is to cover the difference for a tenant that we select from our wait list, to cover the difference between the market rent and the rent that the tenant is paying based on 30% of their income. And
you suggested there was something in these agreements about rent increases. Is there any specific language in these agreements about rent increases or above guideline rent, or they shall be frozen for the period of this contract, or what's in the agreements?
It's based on a benchmark.
okay, so it is actually based on a benchmark rent. It's not based on, for the rent supplement program, it's a benchmark market rent that we set. The landlord does not, for those units, get to decide
Okay.
what the actual subsidy market rent's going to be.
There's a fixed rent.
I believe the province issues a benchmark.
Maybe I'll ask about this later. I just have one other thing. Mr. Abramson, there was a motion to look at, this is my last question, there was a motion to look at property standards and the outstanding condition of private sector buildings, and to look at this issue. We're spending a lot of money and investing a lot in rent supplements and other investments in private buildings that are in many cases in very poor condition and have many outstanding violations for property standards. And we were going to look at this to see whether we could address this using our leverage of funds to ensure that they bring their buildings into property standards compliance.
So my understanding is that an analysis has been done and a report has been prepared, and it's just waiting for the next meeting of the Tenant Issues Committee.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Are there any other questions? You want to do a second round, Councillor Pasternak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just doing my math very quickly here. Would the average supplement across the three programs be in the $8,800 range?
Per year, yes.
Now, I realize it's only anecdotal, but the people who come to my office who are in real need are about $300 or $400 a month away from eviction. Now, without knowing the circumstance of the 10,000 people on this, is there a way to share this a little better? Are we giving too much money to some, and we can share it so that others who are at risk of eviction or unable to stay in an apartment can in fact tap into this?
So through you, Mr. Chair, first of all, we are asking the province for that flexibility. As I said, these programs are under what's called a service level standard, so we have to provide them as RGI, rent guaranteed income housing. We're asking for the flexibility, for example, to provide housing allowances instead and maybe target them to houses that may be facing eviction, for example. But I think the bottom line is you need a lot more funding than this to address the broader need, and you know, there's an analysis that could be done to show what that would look like, but this is a very limited program. All these households need the RGI assistance. They've come off our wait list, and their incomes are such that they need these deep levels of assistance.
But we're using a formula that might not be working on the street. You're using a rent guaranteed income, so you're taking it. You're doing intake on a series of, you know, personal financial items, and then you're doing a calculation.
So
and
this formula is based on the CMHC standard of what core housing need is, which is that a household should be able to afford housing in the community within 30% of their gross income. So this is essentially, so unless they're in that income band, they won't get this assistance. Right. There are many others that are in precarious circumstances that could certainly use a form of housing allowance.
What help do you need from us at the political level to convert some of these funds into housing allowances, which would give us more portability and potentially spread this? Maybe we, instead of 10,961 units, you know, we could get up to, you know, 13,000 by sharing our existing envelope and maybe topping it up.
So you have given us support already in endorsing our submissions to the long-term affordable housing strategy review and yesterday to the CODA review, through which we are asking the province to amend the legislation on service level standards to provide us with flexibility to use the subsidies, use the stock in the way that makes most sense and goes furthest in our community. So the political support, Council has provided that, and the rest, it's up to the province now to make those legislative changes or regulatory changes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, I'm just wondering on a point of order. It is the chair of CDR who's having a lot of interesting questions here. And also, this is one of the most, simply put, and clear reports on this particular set of programs I've seen in a long time. Perhaps so that we can speed through the rest of the budget, we only have 25 more minutes, maybe this information report could be referred to CDR where you could have further information for exactly the members who might deal with any change, because this is info, not a change to the program, and it might be beneficial there.
I think that's a great idea. We could certainly circulate it to CDR and take up the debate there.
So you'd like to move that this be, need a motion?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go to speakers first.
Let me confirm with the clerk on that. Councillor, let's work on the phrasing of that with the clerks. So if we can we're just going to work on, it's fine, they're just trying to figure out how to, yeah. Let's just hold that item. Are there any other questions on this item? Any speakers to the item? Okay. Why don't we just hold it down just for a sec while they confirm, and then we'll figure out how to manage that. Okay, let's go to the last item, which is BU 11.4, an update on the 2016 budget process. I'll just sort of give the update quickly. If there are any questions on that, we can take them afterwards. So I think all the councillors are well aware on the Budget Committee that we have begun an informal process that is customary on the Budget Committee to meet with all the divisions and agencies to gather information in the form of questions through all the divisions and agencies. It's a customary thing we've been doing over the last I don't know how long, Councillor Carroll, if you could sort of indicate, but it's been a while. We've been going through that process. We'll be going through that process probably for the next month before the public session. As part of that process and as part of the work plan that the Budget Committee members have been doing, I put together I guess a set of questions that have come back to us as in the form of a briefing note. Now, these questions are questions that have come up through discussions or dialogues with a lot of the members on the concerns or interests that they may have as part of the budget work plan. These questions have been forwarded to all the division agencies and heads in the form of a briefing note request. Now, those briefing note requests have come back, and they're part of the informal process, the briefing process that we're doing right now. I do want to clarify with the budget members and anybody else, well, the public, I guess, is that these briefing notes will be made public and will be part of the public process when we launch. I don't even know the date of when we launch, but whenever we launch. So I just want to be clear that the work that is doing and the work that is happening right now are all in the form of questions that inform the Budget Committee members on what we're doing and trying to gather the information. All of this in the form of a briefing note will be, of course, public and will be available public as soon as the budget opens. So I just wanted, again, it's just an information item to all of the budget members and staff on process of what we're having or what we're doing in this present time. Questions on Councillor Davis? Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have looked at these questions, and many of them seem to me not to be budget questions that are very clearly HR, legal, policy matters that are matters that ought to be considered within the purview of the authority of the standing committees.
Well, listen, I think they can be part of standing committees, but they all impact financially in some respects. So when you look at all the questions, there is an impact financially at some point. So I think that's as part of the purview of the Budget Committee, these questions are being asked. They could easily be asked at individual standing committees by all means, but as part of the budget process and the financial impact or implications as we go through the process, these are all pertinent questions.
So staff performance, for instance, is so clearly an HR matter. I don't know how job performance, we have a job performance system. It's been to council 3 times. I don't understand how that is going to come under the purview of the Budget Committee.
Again, Councillor, that may be, less financial, but from the perspective of the Budget Committee members, that was, questions they felt wanted to be asked in, with regards to the financial natures of what we're doing. Those items, this briefing note, these briefing notes, will be part of the public process as we move forward. But again, these were, Councillor, these were questions that were brought forward by individual committee members.
Okay, so you're saying that, and many of these already will be governed and contained in briefing in the analyst notes. So you're saying these are supplementary questions that the Budget Committee members asked that will come forward in the form of briefing notes? Is that what this is?
These were questions, as I'm sure you're aware, we go through, I guess, an informal budgetary meeting process that has been customary over the last number of years. So we are having informal meetings with all the divisions and agencies. They do come have a discussion with individual councillors. There's 1 or 2 councillors who will be part of these meetings. They've all been scheduled, and they will, have a discussion. They'll present very preliminary, of course, where they're at, where the divisions are at, and we ask questions on information that we're attempting to gather as we go through the process.
We had a whole closed meeting investigation around this kind of stuff in the last term. I just want to be assured that the closed meeting requirements have been met. I see heads nodding.
Yes, they have been met. There is no closed meeting happening. We are not directing any decisions whatsoever. The committee members are asking questions on information, and that is to the extent of what we're doing.
It's not advancing the work in...
Absolutely not. These are just...
So these will come
questions.
back in public briefing notes, the answers to these questions?
Yes, they will be. They'll be part of the process. We wanted to make clear that there's nothing happening behind the scenes that will not be happening in public. All of this will be public information.
So these will be public briefing notes?
Yes,
Okay.
they will be. Any other questions?
At some point, we will have an opportunity to discuss how briefing notes and so on will happen this...
That will be part of the budget process discussion, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this item? Councillor Carroll?
I do have a concern, and if I could just preface my question with the concern. When we were asked, do you have some questions that you'd like to ask and have asked in the review, I guess I wasn't paying attention because I did not understand that these were actually going to turn into written documents that all happened before the informal review. I thought what we were doing is preparing a list of questions to share amongst budget committee members so that we could look at you know, what people wanted to know, and we would, on behalf of one another, in the informal detailed reviews in teams of two, we would make sure that we were asking questions along those lines. Now that they're being turned into documents, I have two concerns that I'm wondering if I can ask about. I heard you say, Mr. Chair, as we move forward, these will be part of the process. The process was adopted by council. So while this has sort of culturally evolved, if we're going to make this a part of the process, we need to put it in the org chart box of the process that is presented to council and voted on. If council, having used this informal generation of it, may regret that and say, don't do that next year. So I think we've got to keep that in mind, and maybe you could comment on that. And secondly, if you could comment on, because this evolved informally, and we're now doing something and creating paper that council didn't actually ask for, I'm wondering if you could assure me, or perhaps the CFO could assure me, that this is not, how well you present the answers to these questions on paper would not in any way, shape, or form become any kind of performance report or reflection on the staff answering these questions. Because council hasn't asked us to require this of staff yet. We're just doing it.
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, maybe if I can just clarify a bit on the process. The informal review has been part of the budget process.
That's correct.
In the budget process report that we provided, there was an actual box and date time frame.
That's correct.
Of the informal review. And as you said, Councillor, very correctly, this informal review has in fact informally evolved over time. This is another evolution, I would say, of that.
Well, no, this is a documentation of that, which kind of flies in the face of the word informal. So that's my concern.
So a lot of the information that's being provided will be documented and is part of the budget analyst notes in that respect. So that's what my understanding is that what we were doing. So because there's information on, you know, costs and whatever, and those are form part of the analyst notes. And in the analyst notes, they also highlight and update particular issues. And those sometimes, if those questions have a particular issue to them, they'll be highlighted in there. That's what we were envisioning.
Okay.
How it gets documented.
And to my last question then? So my question is it being made clear to staff, just as it was the first year we ever did service level reviews, which was the last year of the term prior to Councillor Crawford, here, and I think that was the year that you arrived halfway through the budget process, working with the City of Toronto. It was a dry run. It was clear to staff we're struggling with this new model that we may proceed to use called core service level reviews, and it was clear to them we want you to try it, It's not going to, this is not the year in which how you work with this new process becomes a part of your own performance evaluation. We'd like to try this. Is that being made clear to people? Because this is an experimental piece of paper.
Through you, Mr. Budget Chief. So I arrived in January of 13, well before that process. But, you know, I mean...
No, I'm talking like 2010. The first time we did this, it was
wasn't
just
there.
a staff-to-staff exercise. And only informal review detailed teams of 2 actually ever even saw the thing. But it was clear to staff, we just want to try it. There's no reflection on you. Just let's all be comfortable and try this model. Is that the basis on which people are submitting the answers to these questions?
I would say that is the general understanding. We have a very committed and hardworking staff. We always try to say yes, to help, to provide information and respond as best we can to council. And I think people are taking this in that vein and being as hardworking and as sincere about this process. Have we said to somebody, if you don't respond to this, you're gonna, you know, your performance gets affected? No, absolutely. Your performance appraisal gets affected? Absolutely not. And I think we're all professional and we all want to help.
Excellent, excellent. On that basis, I'm happy to do the backstroke through these questions.
And I will concur with the CFO on that. Are there any other questions on that? Just the motion to receive. Councillor Campbell, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Now let's just go back to that first item.
Staff undertaking, just motion to receive.
Okay, it'll be a staff undertaking. Okay, motion to, I believe that's a receive item. 11.1, motion to receive. Councillor Pasternak, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Layton, let's go finish our lunch.